Okay, so thank you all for signing up and welcome to our third series of the Public Research Involvement Forum. I'll just give you a brief background into how these have come about and who we are, and that sort of sets the context. And the main topic we're going to be looking at today is grant funding applications, and I'll also explain why those are quite important for patients and members of the public to get involved in. So for those that have attended previous ones, you are going to hear some of the same things again for the intro. But basically, the National Institute for Health Research and Health and Care Research is funded by the Department of Health to basically deliver research within the NHS. So we are not part of the NHS, but we work alongside it. The NHS gets its own budget, the NIHR gets its own budget. And what the NIHR does is they fund different parts of the research process to make sure that the research is focused on NHS needs and NHS requirements. And also the research is something that will definitely have a positive impact on patient health outcomes. So for instance, they typically wouldn't fund, they're not big on funding things where it's to see how a hospital works best with a particular system, because it's very difficult to prove the direct impact on the patient as a result of using that particular technology. But if it's something to do with actually preventing hospitalization, preventing surgery, preventing diseases, treating them, or helping you recover, that is what the NIHR is there for. So they fund research into all of those areas. Now, the NIHR was set up back in 2006. And actually the main drivers for setting up the NIHR were the pharmaceutical companies. So your AstraZeneca, GSK, the big companies basically threatened to leave the UK in the early 2000s because it was just really difficult to deliver research in the NHS. And as a result of working groups, white papers, and all sorts of things, the NIHR basically came into existence. However, as a result of that, what happened was a lot of the processes and procedures to do health research in the NHS were very much geared towards pharmaceutical companies. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, the process and the system worked very well for you, and you could afford the amount of money that was being requested to cover NHS research costs. However, if you're a medical technology company, it was very, very expensive to actually conduct research within the NHS because the processes and the systems weren't aligned to how medical technology is developed, just generally. And that is when the NIHR decided to set up what they called cooperatives. And these cooperatives have been running in some shape or form since 2012. We've had different names, but the current iteration is the MIX, M-I-C, the acronym. And that acronym basically stands for MedTech and In Vitro Diagnostics Cooperative. It's a mouthful, but MIC is the acronym that they've given us. And you've got some that focus on in vitro diagnostics. And in vitro diagnostics basically are things like your urine tests, pregnancy tests. That's what an in vitro diagnostic is, where you basically use somebody's body fluid, body tissue, and you use that to make a diagnosis or to tell you something definitive about what's going on in that part of the body. And we look at just the medtech component. So medtech is usually things that are used to either prevent, treat, or help with the recovery of any particular condition. So just a few examples. So we are surgery, and our focus is predominantly on general surgery. And general surgery in the UK mainly comprises of colorectal surgery, your liver, pancreatic, gallbladder surgery, as well as vascular surgery. We did add neurosurgery as another theme late last year. So we've actually got 4 of those clinical themes. And basically technologies vary from things, solutions that the patient drinks to highlight or flag the tumor to a surgeon. So basically when they're operating people and trying to find out how large the tumor is or trying to locate where the edges of the tumor is, they typically inject a dye into the body. And this dye basically fluoresces a bright color. It can be bright blue, it can be bright green. So then they can actually see where the tumor starts and ends with the naked eye. And that sort of reduces the time in terms of bringing in MRI scans or really huge equipment to try and see where this tumor is. So that also counts as medical technology. What most people would associate with medical technology in terms of surgery would be things like scalpels, for example, and the knives and endoscopes, that type of hardware, a device that you can actually touch. And you also have things like digital technologies, so artificial intelligence falls within that. And this is where you're using predictive technologies, where you place a patch, for example, on a part of the body, and that patch can tell you exactly what's going on, and then it can also learn over time. So examples of where these patches are being used are typically within diabetic foot ulcers, where they're trying to stop the progression of the ulcer itself. Because one of the needs around diabetic foot ulcers is the worst case scenario is you end up with an amputation. And the NHS is trying to avoid amputations because amputations are associated with a high risk of death within a very short time frame. So people are actually dying as a result of the amputations, not necessarily the ulcer itself. So those are things that we help the NHS in terms of talking to companies that are working within that space, talking to startups or anyone with an idea or a concept to say, well, actually, can't we use this technology from agriculture, for example, or from the space industry? Can we use that in the healthcare setting? That is our job, to bring in those ideas, to test those ideas, and then obviously to evaluate them in the form of clinical trials as most people would understand them. And that is the role that the cooperatives undertake. There are 11 cooperatives, 3 of them are in vitro diagnostics. The other 7 are purely medtech, and we're spread out across England because NHR funds units in England only. It doesn't fund Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland because they've got their own equivalents of the NHR, but we do work closely with the partner organizations. So we're not prohibited from working with anyone in those countries, but we just cannot fund activities there. And then you've also got one MIC that's a mixture of the two. It's a diagnostics and a medtech cooperative. So we do cover most of the areas that are important to the NHS, and these include community and primary care. You've got infection, we have cardiovascular, brain injury, trauma, children and young people. There's one called Devices for Dignity, which is looking at rehabilitation technologies. And there's also Mind Tech, which is looking at mental health. And we are typically affiliated with a certain NHS trust, but that's purely for administrative purposes. So David, you asked at the beginning, how many people are from Leeds? Well, in order for us to get paid and to have offices and to have emails, there's an organization that needs to take responsibility for that, because the NHR itself is a virtual organization. It does not have any legal rights. It cannot sign any contracts. So all the contracts are signed through the Department of Health, and the Department of Health delegates that signing authority to the NHS trusts, because that's where they've got a direct line of income flow, and they've already got those processes in place. So for the Surgical MedTech Cooperative, for us, it's the Leeds Teaching Hospitals and the University of Leeds together. So Leeds Teaching Hospitals receives the money, the University of Leeds then manages that money on behalf of the hospital, because that's what universities are good at doing, is research. And the administration, hospitals are good at the patient side and the clinicians. And it had to be Leeds because Leeds is associated with expertise in surgery as well. So that is where the placing of these units, that's where it's based on. So for the mental health, they're based in Nottingham, because Nottingham has got a lot of mental health activity going on. Trauma, for example, is based in Birmingham, and that's because they've got the Ministry of Defense Hospital there, and they treated a lot of the soldiers from Iraq, Afghanistan. So they've got a lot of expertise in terms of trauma-related injuries. So that is how they're all placed across the country. So just because there isn't one in Manchester doesn't mean they can't do the research. It just means they don't have the concentration of expertise to actually manage the entire grant. So that is the Surgical MedTech Cooperative in a nutshell, and the NHR in a nutshell. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments. Yes, Kate. You're still on mute. There we go. Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
So is this just for England, or do we have any in Wales?
No, so in Wales, I've forgotten the name of the research, so the research service that manages the Wales side of things via NHS Wales. But for Wales, it just covers the entire Wales. It doesn't split up into regions like it does. But the NHR works closely with that organization because that's funded through the healthcare boards that are based in Wales. It's not funded through NHS sort of England component, which is where we sort of sit in terms of where our money and our accountability flows.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but we still work with everybody. So just because we're not based in Wales or Scotland doesn't mean we can't work with anyone there. It's actually open to anybody and everybody. Okay, so if there's no additional questions, I'll then move to the particular topic area. Yes, Julie?
Yes, you mentioned it was about grant funding applications.
Yes.
But the email I got wasn't the grants one. So I just wondered if everyone else thought it was about grant funding.
Oh, sorry, that would be my mistake. Thanks for flagging that up, Julie. That would be my mistake. I think it's because when I was writing the notes down, I used grant funding as an example, but thank you for flagging that up. We'll actually
That's good. I hadn't actually thought about grant funding. It was going to have to be on the stage on that one.
It does fit into it, but it's looking at tasks and activities that are expected to be undertaken if you become a patient or public contributor. And grant funding applications is one of them, which is where I got my brain muddled up when I was talking. But thanks for flagging that up. Manoj.
A quick point for the benefit of my colleagues. As of 1st of April this year, the NIHR now stands for the National Institute of Health and Care Research, but the abbreviation remains NIHR. So also funds social care research now.
Yeah, thank you, Manoj, for that. Okay, so for those that are not haven't joined our Patient and Public Involvement Committee formally, Manoj, Julie, and Rashmi are members of our PPI committee. So they do help us set the strategic direction. They're there to tell us where we're getting things wrong and how to make things right. That is their job. And they're also there to sort of go through the individual projects, for example, and guide us on the best way to do things. So they will also be inputting their direct experiences of what they've gone through with the surgical MIC itself and possibly other providers as well, so that you get a balanced view. So you don't just have me telling you how fabulous it is. They will tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and they're allowed to do that in all its glory, because that's the purpose of it. We want you to be informed. We want you to know everything that happens before you make any decisions when you get to that point. So as I've been corrected by Julia, we're looking at the tasks and activities of a patient and public contributor. And what do we mean by that? So one of the questions we get asked is actually, if I want to become a PPI member, which is an acronym, what exactly am I going to do? Am I just being asked to read summaries and just they tick a box and say that's been done? Am I actually going to be treated with respect? Are people actually going to listen to my contributions? We get all those questions. And if you look on our website, we do have generic things that are listed on there. But I thought it would be good if we can hear from the surgical MIC PPI committee members on what they've been asked to do and their take on actually, you know, the roles and the responsibility, and obviously the things that work and the things that don't. So what I'll do is I'm going to pass on. First of all, I think I'll start with Rashmi, because Rashmi, you came in, I won't say completely new, but you're probably the freshest pair of eyes we've got in terms of how this works. So if you could, obviously, in your own words, take your time, just sort of provide an idea of your experience. First of all, what you've been asked to do, what it involves, and basically your feedback on that.
Thank you, V. Well, firstly, I would say, yes, it was quite challenging for me because medtech and all the technology that the group gets involved in, the school gets involved in, was quite, I found it quite academic, quite clinical, medical, and it was outside my comfort zone because being a carer, I was aware about sort of the health condition, and I have been doing health and care research, PPI work for the last 3+ years, but even then I found it challenging. But what I found, the good thing that I found was V was very, very helpful. She will spend time with you, guide you, help you in any way you want. If there's certain things that you don't understand, if there's certain help you want, certain clarification, words, or you don't know what you want to do or what you've been asked to do, she's there. She's so capable. The other thing I found, this PPI group that we is talking about, actually everyone is so helpful, and we all know each other quite well, so you will not feel that you're on your own. You are part of a family, and we will support you, we will help you, and that's the excellent. I mean, Manoj was very, very helpful in making us feel part of a team, and others in the group, we helped each other. What will be expected of you? Actually, don't feel that you are supposed to be a medical expert or an academic, or you just need to be yourself. If it doesn't make sense to you, you can bet your bottom dollar 9 people out of 10 out there will not understand. So don't look down on yourself. If it doesn't make sense to you, it won't make sense to anyone else. If it makes sense to you, that means the researchers, the clinicians have put the document information in a very simple way. They will always take time to go through the presentation, explain to you in detail, and you just need to be yourself. You need to, it's helpful to have understanding about not just your challenges, but the challenges that other patients, other communities are probably experiencing. So what is happening out there in the community? And if you share that with the researchers, that's what you're there for, to actually bring lived experience, the voice of the lived experience in the mind of the researchers, so they can then start thinking, actually, whatever they are doing, are they doing that in a meaningful way, in a respectful way, in a way that it will not become a burden for you? And I think that's the only thing I can say. I have found it not burdening. I mean, you can go to some institutes and some research program where you will find it to be quite challenging and quite tiresome and exhaustive, and you won't feel as if you've made any valued contribution. On this program, you will actually feel that you're part of the family. And that's the only thing I can say. I truly feel that.
Thank you, Rashmi. And one of the, so for example, when Rashmi joined, when we had our recruitment round towards the end of last year, actually one of his suggestions was to set up these forums, because with him coming actually from the outside and not being fully an expert PPI person, he thought this actually would be useful. This type of forum and setting would actually be useful for those who want to understand a bit more about what goes on, and actually just talk in an environment where no one's going to look down on you or laugh at you for not knowing certain terms. So this is one of the things that's resulted as a result of that. So we do take, your voice seriously. We do try and implement things within obviously budget constraints and everything else considered. And one of the side effects of COVID actually has been, we've all been forced to adopt virtual meetings. So this has really enabled these meetings as well, because if COVID hadn't happened, I can probably guarantee you that 80% of these forums you'd have to travel to Leeds. And that just means you get minimum input from people because you've also got lives. You don't exist for our whims and wishes, basically. So thank you, Rashmi. Julie, I'll move to you.
So I'll start by talking a bit about some of the activities that I've been involved in since joining the surgical medtech. It's really important with research that the PPI are involved at a very early stage. I think, you know, a few years ago now, it would be the case that they draw up a project, get funding, and then recruit the PPI to sit on the trial management group. So they didn't involve the PPI in design and the early stages. And so you could end up with something getting funded that actually had quite a few barriers that could have been spotted by involving the patient at an earlier stage. So what I've really enjoyed with the group is that they run a lot of focus groups with companies who are thinking of starting, they've got an idea for an innovation, but they want to see what the patients think of it and whether the patients can see any problems in getting the public to come forward for this research. And that will help them at this early stage when they're really sort of getting their bid together. And I was on one with just this morning with Rashmi and Manoj, and they've been running regularly through the summer. And I think it's really good to have this opportunity for companies, because with a lot of researchers working in the NHS and in universities, they're used to doing research, they know about having to involve PPI, and they know what PPI are there for. And I think with a lot of the companies, it's a little bit of a new idea. And so to give them access to the public through the surgical medtech is really good for them. And I think that they often seem quite surprised by some of the things we bring up and some of the questions they ask. And they're thinking, oh, right, well, we'll go back to the drawing board with that one, you know, and maybe alter the way we think about things. So I think it's helping save them a lot of effort and probably money, and making their funding bid more successful. If they can say they've had PPI involved at this planning stage, they're more likely to get funding from the funding bodies, because the funding bodies ask that question. What have you done about PPI at the funding stage, you know, pre-bid stage, you know, and what are your plans for involving PPI as the project goes on? And if people can't answer those questions, quite often they don't get funded. So, you know, we're providing a very good service, but it's very satisfying, I think, to be able to put the patient point of view and to really think about the risks and benefits to the patient, which is, we think of it perhaps in a slightly different way to researchers. We come at it from a different angle. We think about practical barriers to patients. You know, are they going to be able to get to the hospital 3 times a week for this particular treatment? Is it going to be difficult for them? And those are the things that we raise from the patient's point of view. We can also look at issues that could cause problems in recruitment. You know, you've got to be able to recruit participants to the trial. And if you don't spot something simple, like the fact that you're inviting them all in at 9 o'clock in the morning and the bus pass doesn't start till 10, well, you could have some very practical problems. So we look at it from a different point of view. We also often look at early versions of patient information sheets and lay summaries and that sort of thing, because again, we see it from a different angle. We're looking at things that are readable and understandable to the patient, and also to people who might not be sort of in the scientific research. They might be health economists or they might be statisticians. So they need a lay summary to look at as well, and a lay summary can fit both those angles. The activities can be very, very varied. I've only just started with surgical medtech, so I haven't had a wide range of activities. So I did go to a day in Bristol just 2 weeks ago, which was a really interesting day, and it was all about establishing guidelines for a core information set for surgical innovation. So they've drawn up things a patient needs to be told before they have some innovative procedure, And then we had this meeting looking at what standards would you have to draw up to make sure that these core information set of guidelines was going to be carried out. So that was something interesting and something I hadn't done before. Varied things I've done with other projects before I started with surgical medtech. They can be very varied. You know, I've been doing some media work recently. I've been on television and Radio Wales live. Not too sure that I'm very fond of that, but and I've helped produce a document that's going to go to our government body, the Senate, about priorities for cancer research, medical research generally in Wales. That's really nice to feel that you're having influence at that sort of higher level. But it's up to you what you become involved in. You know, if you don't want to do media things, you don't have to. Some people really want to keep well away from that. And that's the good thing about PPI. You can pick the things where you feel you can contribute and you've got something to offer and you want to do, but you can leave alone things that might not be your cup of tea. So I'll not say a lot about support. I endorse everything that Rashmi said about the fact that we and the team are really wonderful at supporting us. We feel we know what's going on, and it's a good organisation to work for. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And I think just to expand on some of the points that Julie has said. So I know she touched on MedTech focus groups. And once again, I think MedTech focus groups is another example of something that came from the patients themselves to say, well, actually, can we have more of these things? Because typically what happens when companies or people are developing a technology to use for patients, regardless whether it's surgery or not, is you get really intelligent, bright people. They've got an idea and it sounds really, really perfect, on paper, and it's really snazzy and things. So occasionally you'll see these headlines on some newspaper or something that says, well, the NHS is not using this technology, which is super duper and it's going to save the world. But what they don't say in the small print is, whilst the technology might be good, it's actually not solving a problem within the NHS. And as the NHS is funded by taxpayers' money, I don't think you'd want us to endorse technologies that are actually not going to do anything. They're just as good as sugar pills, basically, for people who are taking them. So what the MedTech focus groups really do is we more or less force the companies to come face to face with the potential users of a particular technology and say to them, well, you need to let these people know what you're designing, what you're developing, and they will tell you whether it's a good idea, whether it's going to fit a particular need, or what are the things that would put them off using that particular technology. And as Julie said, they've found it immensely useful. And at the moment, we're working on getting all the feedback so we can produce either a nice glossy video or some digital something so that you can actually hear from the companies themselves on how your input actually makes a difference. In some instances, it actually changes the direction of travel for the company. So they might have set out to develop it for one clinical area, but it ends up being developed for something else based on what you have said as either patients or carers or just members of the public with an interest. As Julie's also said, you get documents, you get things to be reviewed. If you get involved on projects, then you more or less are part of the project team. And your time is actually written up to any grant funding application. So you actually get paid as a normal member of a team. We're not expecting you to do that work for free. And if you're interested in the academic side and you contribute to the final research report or the publication, then your name also goes in that publication as a contributor and someone who's actually helped guide the process from a patient and public perspective. So we do have a few of our members who've actually got publications to their name, and people might look at them and think, wow, they're very academic. But actually, no, they've actually told people what's the best time to recruit people, what's the best time to get people inside a hospital, what's the best time to make sure people aren't put off by hospital parking charges, for example, and things like that. And you might think those things are really trivial, but they make a difference in terms of the number of patients you end up recruiting for a clinical trial. And the more patients you have in a clinical trial, the more data you have to actually make an informed decision on whether that technology or treatment should be used in the NHS. So that's how important those activities are. And as Julie's mentioned, you don't have to be an expert in that area. All we just really need are people with an interest in that area. It might be you've got an eye for statistics, you might have an eye for theory, you might have an eye for a certain part, and that is what the researchers actually want to use you for. Because obviously we're going to have the surgeons, but obviously if you're a patient that's had the surgery or the treatment in question, then you can contribute a whole lot more in terms of your experiences of using a particular technology. So manage your experiences and tasks and activities which you've been asked to do, which are numerous.
Okay, thank you, Vi. Thank you for excellent introduction from Rashmi and Julie. Both Julie and Vi has touched upon focus groups. So what I've done for today's presentation is outline typically what we do when we attend these focus groups. So we've been attending focus groups for at least a year and a half. They usually last for about an hour and a half, and they're organized and run by Roxana, one of these colleagues. Prior to the focus group, and we had one this morning, we receive a brief. So we'll get some documentation to read. We might get some slides, 2 or 3 A4 sheets, slides to go through about the topic, the innovation, the intervention that's going to be discussed in the focus group, say today, as was the case. So we express an interest in attending, and we get selected. We receive the link from Roxana and we attend. But prior to that, most of us will have read the brief. We will have thought of some important questions that need to be asked from a patient, carer, service user perspective. We act as critical friends. We're not just there as passive passengers. We listen attentively to the researchers, the clinicians, the innovators, the inventors, but then we get an opportunity to ask key important questions that are important from the service users' perspective, the people that use the NHS services. So we act as critical friends. I mean, I in particular, I'll make lots of notes. I will ask a few questions, but questions that need to be asked, and then I seek clarification on issues that I'm unsure about, like I did this morning. So I think we play a very vital role in providing essential feedback to these innovators, clinicians that are coming up with wonderful ideas, but will they actually work in the NHS? Will our patients actually benefit? How will patients benefit? And just as I mentioned this morning, the issue of availability of a service versus accessibility. So, I mean, I live in the great city of Manchester, and Manchester is big, it's a big city. Now, a particular service being available in South Manchester is very different from that service being available in East Manchester, where we're based. So locality and accessibility of a service is key from, say, a patient care perspective. We ask what costs are involved, if any, to patients of using this new intervention if it's introduced to the NHS. How much will it cost the NHS as opposed to standard practice? Now, as and when the presentation in the focus group has finished, we may be asked and we may volunteer to continue with this research project, in which case we'll be asked to read a lay summary. In fact, we often end up redrafting the plain English to make sure it's written in plain English. And obviously we will ask to see, well, I particularly will ask to see what are the patient benefits. Because if that's not clear in the plain English summary, when the grant application is put forward to the funding panel, that's one of the key questions, key issues. It's got to be explicit. How will patients benefit from this intervention, from this invention, from this innovation? We can also be asked to act as co-applicants, as Vi has mentioned. This is whereby you are named as one of the co-applicants on the research grant application itself. You then, once if the grant application is funded, you're then asked to sit on the study steering committee, and you sit on the same committee as the senior people, senior managers, the clinicians, the academics involved in the study. Prior to the full grant application being submitted, you might get asked to read the full grant application, and I've done that a few times. That can be 35 pages long, so that can be quite tiring and burdensome at times. As I've sort of touched upon, so we've attended the focus group meeting, we've assisted with the grant application, it's been submitted to NIHR, and let's say it's been funded. It's one of the grant applications that's been fully funded. It's been successful. So then we get notification from Roxana and her colleagues that this grant application, we've been successful. The first introductory meeting is on such a day. Are you in a position to attend this meeting? Thereafter, you might get asked to sit on a study steering committee, which may be every 2 months, every 3 months, which is like an oversight committee that monitors progress of the research proposal once it's in place. We can attend general PPI meetings. There may be additional focus groups meetings once the grant application has been approved. As public contributors, we can actually lead or co-facilitate some of the PPI meetings, and in particular the focus groups. We can also be involved in participant interviews if they take place. Either people that use NHS services, extract their views and opinions, and we could be involved in that process. We could help analyze any interview findings, any feedback. In this stage is known as data analysis. We can actually help write up findings for the dissemination stage. Now, has this intervention worked? Has it been effective? Has it been useful? Will it be used? So we could be involved at the dissemination stage and also the evaluation stage. With it being NIHR funded, ultimately there has to be a funders report that has to be submitted to them, outlining what progress has been made, milestones have been met, or if there's going to be a request for an extension, how long for, and will it be at any cost or zero cost. So we could be involved in that. Could definitely be involved in any dissemination events once this new intervention becomes standard practice within the NHS. Leeds Hospital Trust, Leeds University itself might have some sort of dissemination event that we would be invited to attend. So that's sort of general overview of focus groups and my involvement with focus groups, and then funding applications submitted. Now, in general, what I would say in terms of roles and responsibilities would be, we read documents, we get asked to attend meetings, we engage in email correspondence, we take the work seriously. Qualities in terms of responsibility as well. It helps if one is punctual, if you're dedicated, you're committed, you're loyal. I and my colleagues, we take the work seriously. Of course, it's not work, but there are deadlines that have to be met. In terms of challenges, which is standard sort of thing with PPI work, time. So sometimes you get an email, and this has happened to me, whereby it's Thursday night and one of the surgeons says, can you look at this plain English summary? Oh, by the way, can I have it back by such a time on Friday? So you're given a day. You're given a day. I might have other things to do, but if you can, you do it. Otherwise, you have to decline. So that short notice of work that has to be submitted could be an issue in terms of a challenge. IT issues, it goes without saying. Technical nature, clinical nature of some of the grant applications, obviously, because it's not everyday thing when you're dealing with medical technology. That can be an issue. The ability to read, understand technical, clinical information at times. But as Rashmi and Julie have indicated, the team at Leeds Surgical Met and MedTech are very supportive. V and her colleagues are there to help, but you've got to make the effort to ask for help. Help will be there. I will stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Manoj, for that extensive summary. Yeah, I think in terms of asking for help, I think that's very important. That's what we're there for. And in terms of the short deadlines as well, you don't have to actually agree to do it. As manager said, if you really can't do a review within 2 hours or 24 hours, it is perfectly okay to decline. Chances are there might be somebody who will be able to do it, or they might still continue and submit it without, but it's highly likely they're not going to get any funding or, or get through the first or second round of any funding streams as a result of that. So we try and train our clinicians really well to say, if you want anything, people have got their own lives. You need to give enough advance warning for that. Another thing to add before I just open up to questions is all this time that you're contributing and all these contributions that you're making, there is, the time is acknowledged financially. So we do offer sort of I don't want to call them an incentive because it's really not an incentive, but really it's about acknowledging that if you provide really good feedback for a MedTech focus group, for example, and that company potentially goes on to commercialize their research, it is only right that your time is reimbursed because you have helped them get across the finish line and you're not asking for a single penny of those profits. So what we do is we reimburse your time. There's certain rates that go with that, and they're published somewhere on some NHR website, but I'm happy to send the information directly to those that can't find it. I'll probably send it in the follow-up email tomorrow, actually. But typically what you're looking at is about £35 per hour. And a full day event is set at £150 and half day 75. But if you do get involved in a project that is a bespoke project, then their rate might be higher because the project funders might actually state that you've got to spend a minimum of X amount of pounds on anyone who contributes as a patient or a public member. So all your contributions are acknowledged, your time is reimbursed. If you ever have to attend any physical events or face-to-face meetings, then we do pay for the travel as well. We pay if you require hotel costs. We do pay that. We're still working on getting more unified guidance, for example, for paying carers, because we also have a high proportion of PPI members that are carers. And if they want to get involved, that means they've got to get somebody else to step in on their behalf for the caring component. And that time also needs to be reimbursed. So we do think carefully about these things. And if we're not able to do it, we will let you know. We're not going to let you go to an event or contribute to a project and then turn around and say, well, actually, you're not going to get anything for that. 99% of the times you will be told upfront what you can expect to get out of it. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's varied. What you'll be asked for is varied. You can choose what you want to get involved in. You can also choose when you actually step back and say, well, actually, this is really not for me. I'm just going to bow out of this. No one's going to hold any ill feelings towards you. So on that note, just check if anyone's got any comments, any questions. Yes, David?
I've got quite a few comments really, but first of all, can I just go back to what you've just been saying about payment for these sort of things? I've been involved with Voice in Newcastle for, as I say, about 7 or 8 years. And I've never, ever wanted to do that for the payments involved. Sometimes get a voucher. One project I got a sort of hourly rate, which actually caused me so much of a problem with the salaries department at the university, who've got it wrong and have still got it wrong, but that's beside the point. I'm not interested, but I appreciate that some people are. Going back to the general subject, PPI has become a lot more important in recent years. And I'm a member of a steering committee for a large-scale cardiology trial that's spread across 40 centres in the UK, but coordinated from Newcastle. And some time ago, I was asked if I would give a talk to the British Cardiovascular Society conference in Manchester, strangely enough, which I agreed to do. And it was the role of the layperson on a steering committee. And it was very much to do with the elimination of jargon. Because I don't know if many of you know Newcastle upon Tyne, but there's an area of Newcastle called Byker, which is quite run down and not particularly nice. And my role model patient is Mrs. Cannybody from Darkest Byker. And my argument is that if she doesn't understand what's being said to her by clinicians, then those clinicians are not getting properly informed consent. So they need to be clear, not patronizing, but clear, and avoid using jargon. And one example I used was, why do you say respiration when you can talk to Mrs. Cannybody and just say breathing? Because she'll know what breathing is, but you won't necessarily know that respiration is broadly the same thing, except in plants. So that's one area where I think we can do a lot of good work. And our research support group, which is the same as monthly meetings, and we split into 3 groups now with 3 researchers, produces some very diverse comments that the researchers have found extremely valuable, because we come at problems and issues from very different backgrounds and very different angles. And that's, I think, is the beauty of it. Incidentally, I've got to reapply for my role on that committee from next September. So I've been writing my job application out. So that researchers are queuing up to get in front of us with this. And it's largely to do with the critique of the project, but also the critique specifically of things like the lay summaries. One example of this was a guy who was a researcher into dementia with Lewy bodies. And this was first of all done online. And he produced a lay summary that ran to 8 sides of very tightly packed A4. Now, in our book, a lay summary should be probably about 1.5 sides, maximum 2 sides of A4. And I filled in the questionnaire that came online about it and was asked, well, and when I sent it back, I said, if the researcher would like to talk to me about this, I'd be very happy. And he actually sent me a revised version that had gone down to about 6 sides. Well, I spent quite a lot of hours one day rewriting his whole summary, using wherever possible his words and not mine. Yeah. And I became a very transient expert in dementia with Lewy bodies. Forgotten it all now. But the result of that was I sent it to him and he said, do you mind if I just send this in as it is? And he did, and he got his grant awarded. Mm-hmm. He's subsequently been back with another project to our research support group, where again, he had an overly complex lay summary that the people beforehand, because this was a face-to-face meeting, were all saying, this is awful, it's no good as a lay summary. But he actually gave the best presentation that most of us had heard in a long time. Mm-hmm. But he'd been shoehorned into being a last-minute substitute, so he hadn't had time to do it. So I've worked with people like him, and I think we've been a genuine help in bringing it forward and getting awards. What is important also is that we get feedback from the researchers, and Voice Up Here is very keen to badger the researchers to give some feedback. It needn't be pages and pages, but just a little note of where they're up to, because I know these projects can take a long time to complete. Yeah. But a little sort of progress report and how they found dealing with the research support group, because we're a nice group of people and we don't bite, and it's a support group and not a critical group. Yeah. Critique but not critical. Yeah. If you follow the difference. And it has become a lot more important that good PPI is there. And in the past, people were brought onto these things as tokens more than anything else. And that's entirely wrong, because I think there are enough interested people, as evidenced by people here today, that can provide a genuine contribution to it and make the researchers' job easier and hopefully help them to get their funding. The defense rests.
No, thank you for that contribution, David. And I think on the topic of feedback, that's one of the things we are going to focus on for the next financial year, is get all the feed from all the PPI, any company or researcher that's had a focus group or any type of PPI involvement. We actually want them to give us some substantial feedback that, first of all, we can provide back to the individual contributors, but also we need to showcase them so that more people actually understand the impact. Because I think, if we don't do that, then people sort of know what you can do, but people don't know whether it's made a difference or not. And I think if people who are new to research understand that, well, actually I can say something and I can have an impact. So for example, in your example with the horrendous lace summary, the impact on, now, it might not have contributed 100%, but that definitely made a difference, because in the research field, we know lay summaries are very important. If the reviewers don't like the lay summary, chances are they're not going to read the rest of the application in its entirety, and it just literally goes in the bin. So lay summaries are also very important. So thanks for your perspective on that, David. Manoj?
Very quick point, but Hamid's in front of me actually. But, on that lay summary issue on funding panels, to be honest, what happens is this. So say like myself as a public contributor, I get asked to review five grant applications, which I have to fully read, and so do any of the other public contributors. But the rest of the panel members are not going to read every single grant application that's in front of them. They will depend on the public contributors' views on that lay summary they've read and what they've summarized about that grant application. So if I've said the lay summary is very poor, I've not really understood this grant application, is not well written, some of the other panel members will take it upon face value. So I can't stress enough how good that lay summary has to be in the first place. Now, I'll read the 5 grant applications I've got to do, but the other panel members will read the grant applications they've got to do, whether it's a health economist, whether it's a statistician, whether it's a methodologist. They will not have time to read every single grant application. So they will take it on face value, the views and opinions of the public contributor, who between us have read all the grant applications.
Yeah, thanks, Manu. Important for those that have never reviewed lay summaries, because it might be, you might get one and your contribution might be, I don't understand what that acronym is. Who are these people? What do they do? That's very, very important. And it's important that you go back to the researcher with those questions, because it's not necessarily about, you need to have been an English teacher and you know how to write perfect English and grammar and how to use, simple words. But it really can be down to that level of simplicity, as in, I don't know what DNA stands for. Why is it important in this context? I'm not getting that sense of that. And that is what the researchers are actually wanting to get from PPI members. Hamid, and then I'll come to you, David. Hamid?
Thank you, V. I would just like to say that this is my second session, and every time I come, I'm finding it that it's so useful and valuable, and I'm always picking up new things. And I like to say that I would really love to get involved wherever possible as a PPI member. I know Rashmi and Manoj are fantastic. I know them from other forums and places. And it just seems like this is a great platform to really be here and express interest. So if there is opportunities, please let me know. And also I'm happy to get involved with focus group, PPI, reading lay summaries, giving feedback, whatever way possible. And I think at some point we should think about doing an equality, diversity, and inclusion, like a conference or something that really talks about PPI, diversity in PPI and PPI in research, that kind of a triangle, and look at it from 3 different dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution, Hamid. And I think you raise an important topic in terms of the equality, diversity in research. And it's actually more important now, mainly because of the rise of artificial intelligence in just about everything. And I think, if you're not aware, there's a whole lot of where the AI is being developed, obviously by one particular demographic. And all those views then inform how that AI does the detection. And it might not actually work for other people. So I think what they found now is a lot of the AI tools actually are very terrible at prediction for ethnic minorities and women as well. They work very well for white men, but they don't work very well for anybody else outside that particular demographic. And it's to do with the input and the different perspectives that are required to actually ask those questions. And I go back to my point is there's no silly question. you know, when you're in these focus groups. If the silliest question is what we want you to ask, and as others have already alluded, myself or whoever's running the focus group, we are there to make sure that that view is not squashed down as unimportant. But I'll probably come back to you, Hamid, on sort of discussing sort of the conference aspect of it, because it is something we did think about before COVID, and then obviously, before you know it, 3 years have literally gone down the drain, and you don't know what.
I know. I think it's an exciting time because people have been deprived for 3 years coming together face to face. I think there will be such a high level of excitement, the fact that something's going to be happening face to face. It'll be lovely to meet everybody and really get to know everyone on a deeper level. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're certainly welcome. And what I'll do at the end, when I send the final email tomorrow with a link to the video, is there is a link to our mailing list. If you select PPI, then you get notified of all the MedTech focus groups that are coming up. And you know, if you want to be involved in planning or organizing this conference or PPI conference, then all that notifications will come through that mailing list. So I will send the link out for those that are interested. David.
It was just a very quick aside, really.
Thank you. That would be great.
One of our members is a retired head of English at a large comprehensive school. So you can guarantee that she will keep the spelling, punctuation, and grammar absolutely spot on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and the point is, you just contribute what you can, what you're good at.
Exactly. She does a lot more as well. But,
yeah. Thank you, David. Rashmi.
Just a couple of observations. One of the reasons why I felt this group to meet like this informally, and it is informally, and we originally sort of had an idea of calling it a coffee get together or a coffee morning or a coffee evening, was really to build that relationship with between ourselves, but also to encourage our friends and families to come and understand a little bit more about the research, health and care research. So it is a really informal session. Please do not feel that you have to say something or you have to contribute. We are here to support each other. It is really an informal session. It's not a formal session, because what you will find, the PPI group that we tend to have, however often we tend to meet, that becomes a bit more formal, where it's very structured. You have to go through the research ideas, research proposals, and it has to be structured because it is considered, well, it has to be time limited, and it has to go forward for research application or research delivery. So this is really an informal session. And if anyone wants sort of contact details through we can get each other's contact details. It's absolutely not a problem. And we all share each other's contact detail. That's the first idea. Second observation that I wanted to share is, beside this informal session and the PPI group, there are loads of other opportunities or lots of other areas where you can find out about health and care research through seminars, through conferences, through webinars. Again, if there is a topic which is really meaningful for you, maybe health condition, maybe health device or new technology, you can also attend those webinars. But as we said, there's only limited pot of finance and funding that is available. So the PPI group that you will attend, you will get paid. Everything else may not be funding until a later date. I think that's important to make it very clear. People shouldn't go away thinking, well, I can do this and I can do this and I can do that. You can end up sort of doing too much and then find yourself that you don't get any payments for that, and you might get disappointed. Please don't feel disappointed. We are here to talk to each other and help each other.
Thank you for that, Rashmi. And that's an important point, is obviously don't take too much on. And as obviously the purpose of this session is, it's really informal, because there's other formal webinars on PPI, And those are manned by people with significantly more expertise than I do in clinical things and academic things. But the purpose of these is actually just to talk frankly. If you don't like an aspect about it, that's perfectly fine. We're not going to hold it against anybody. We use that as a mechanism to sort of slowly start to drive the wheels of change forward. So for instance, there's some PPI members that are happy to not take any payment whatsoever. And we're perfectly fine for that. You're not forced to take the payment. And there are other PPI members that do need that payment because that might be something that is going to make an impact based on the time they've taken off, which they could be doing other things. I know for others, that was a potential income source of some sort. We don't ask any questions, but basically if you need a payment, then we obviously take the cue from you, and then we sort that out. But going on the topic of, this is an open forum, those that have worked with us at the Surgical MIC will know of the painful process of sometimes getting your payment out, because the processes can be very long and laborious from our host organizations. The best we can do is sort of reassure people and obviously keep chasing up the payment until it's done. But that's what we're there for. We're not just an administrative function where we send you emails, we reply. Before COVID, we actually had a few people who just phoned the office and just talked to us about what was going on in their lives. And we do take the time out for that. So we're not going to say, well, actually, if it's not related to a project, go away. We do actually take the time to listen to people's concerns and their requirements, and we try and make things work. So yeah, it's whatever opportunities, if you sign up to our mailing list, whatever opportunities come up, it's up to you. You can ask for more information. Feel free to write us an email and actually probe us a bit deeper if you think that there isn't enough information. David, I know you said you're on Voice, so we are also on the Voice platform. So if you're registered on the Voice platform, then our opportunities also go there as well.
Yeah.
So you don't need to register separately for this. It should come through depending on what you've ticked for your options. But we try and get things as far and as wide as possible. There's People in Research website. If you're into social media, Twitter, Facebook, we also try and put things out on those platforms as well. But we're happy. And as always, if you think there's something we should be doing that we're not, or that we should consider doing, then we are more than happy to listen to what you have to say and see if we can work it out. So Cheryl, sorry to put you on the spot. I know you mentioned in your introduction you work with students. How do you think this is something that would be beneficial for them?
Oh yeah, definitely. I do work with the students at the uni, and I've also done quite a bit of work with the MH and the IHR. And a lot of it overlaps. I do find all my different interests and different things that I do overlap. I seem to do a lot of things, but they do overlap, and with that, it really helps. And I can often, I can then say to a student, oh, well, there's this. And a lot of the time I've said that to them, and it's actually really helped them develop, something that they might need in one of their big essays or something. They'll need to like cite a website or find some research out themselves, or even, that they can talk to you as well. And it's really helpful. And the thing, someone mentioned it before, I don't know if it was you, I can't remember, sorry, about how it's open to everyone across the country. And that is something that I've really noticed with these meetings. It's so nice that you can talk to different areas, whereas normally, pre-pandemic, and a lot of the things I've done over the last 10, 20 years, it's always been very much this little area, this is what you deal in this area. But with this, it's so nice that you can talk to different sections, to different cities across the country. But because we've all got the same goal at the end of the day, you will help each other get there, and there's the community spirit, and that's something I'm very, very strong on. Community, I love getting involved in linking together, and that is something that really comes strongly through these forums. And it is nice to have a relaxing forum as well, and it's just such a good opportunity, and it's definitely something that's getting more and more recognised now, that to have that patient point of view is important, and it's about time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Yeah, and to Rashmi's point, you know, it's about building that community and, you know, making people feel welcome. And you know, and you've highlighted, you know, for us it's national. We're actually trying to get a whole lot of things outside of Leeds. We're not interested at all in building a huge fortress in Leeds, where we want to get everybody anywhere and everybody will take them. And likewise, I mean, if your area, you might not be interested necessarily in surgery, but on our mailing list, we also send other things out that are still linked to some of the units that we work with. So we work closely with, there's something called the Leeds Biomedical Research Center based at Leeds, and they look at musculoskeletal conditions. So anything to do with arthritis and that kind of thing, you know, they usually send opportunities through for us to send through to our network as well, because we do recognize, yeah, because we do recognize that the conditions, most people usually aren't just sick with one thing. You know, there's other different things that come into it as well. Any other comments?
Sorry, I was just going to quickly just say that it's so nice that, you know, to have that opportunity to be able to talk to someone sort of higher up that you might not normally be able to get to talk to. I mean, I've had fibromyalgia since I was 13, which is a long time, and it's definitely changed throughout that. You've seen how the research has changed. I was just talking to some researchers the other day on a different funding thing, and they were like looking at the research that was available back then. And it's just like, we need to look at it now, and this is what's important now, because you know, medicine does advance. People think different things, learn different things, and that is again something that's so important about this, that everyone can share all the different views.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, with our surgeons that we work with, they're really friendly guys. So we've had some patients who just actually want to talk directly to the surgeon on a specific technology, and they're usually actually happy to give you a private audience to explain things. And they're actually very good with terminology. They're not going to sit there and reel off all these huge names and things. They actually understand what information needs to be processed and how to do that. So, you know, so that's one of the benefits as well for us, is we have managed to herd our cats, as we call them, into providing something that actually works, you know, for everybody else. And I think particularly in surgery, it's actually more important, because that's where you've had a lot of disaster areas and things that have happened to patients. So, you know, you've had the hip implants where I think it was titanium that they made them out of. But a couple of years later, these things started to disintegrate and all sorts of things started to happen in the body. But, you know, no patient involvement was done back then, because then people would have actually asked those questions about, what about this material? What is it going to do? You know, the more widely known ones, the mesh scandals, or the vaginal mesh scandals and the pelvic mesh scandals, where, you know, basically a certain technology was put into people, but it didn't really take into account how people move, whether you run, and people suffered significant damage, you know, as a result of that. And that's what we're here to do, is to try and stop those things from going as far as being used in the hospitals, and just getting, you know, people to take a step back and saying, well, actually, if you're a patient, would you want this inside you? If you wouldn't want it inside you, why do you want it in somebody else? Basically, just because you get paid for it. So yeah, important work. And I do agree, people are starting to take more notice of it now, but I think it's more to do with the funders. They're starting to demand that as well. Okay, any closing statements from anyone else?
So, can I ask a question again? I'm quite interested in, I suppose since I retired, I've been appalled really at how awful the attitudes and cultures are towards the patients. And so those are things I've been looking at and trying to sort of make a little bit of headway. And I just wondered whether any of the research that you fund would be looking into that sort of aspect, because it does seem to me that some parts of the NHS are very easily swayed by inducements and incentives. And other parts are being very neglected because they're not supported by inducements and incentives. And once you start having sort of business models which only work when you get this, for instance, in primary care, most GPs work as a business.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've noticed that the things that increase the income for the practice, like prescribing drugs, are prioritized over things like managing the medical conditions and the drugs, and for which take up the time of the doctor, but don't get any reward. So whilst I'd be happy to look at any grant applications and so on with, you know, which involve surgery, I would be particularly interested if there were slightly more medical, philosophical, organizational aspects, because it does seem to me it's going seriously wrong. Yeah,
and thanks for that, Kate. And the answer is yes. I think people are starting to look at it. The slightly bad news, it's still in little silos. So from our perspective, we know the colorectal team are starting to look at, you know, how information is provided to patients that are about to undergo, you know, bowel cancer surgery. There's things around colonoscopy, for example, where patients often feel like their need for, if people need pain relief, you know, it's like they're not believed that they need that pain. And actually, how do you get the healthcare professionals to understand that, well, it might, just because it says it's not painful in the medical leaflet doesn't mean that's what happens in practice. So I know they're certainly starting to look at, first of all, they're concentrating on the communication requirements, is actually what are the principles of that. And I know the next step they're going to be looking at is actually how do we get the healthcare professionals to do that. So it's just recently starting, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's lots similar activity in other different clinical areas. But it is something that I can definitely find out for you, because we obviously can find out through our network of other PPI groups, what other informations come through, because we also get requests for involvement for those philosophical type of requirements. Like you said, it's not always a medical device. You know, so for example, we had things around, you know, statistics, what's the best way to work our statistics, and how can we make sure the patient impact is reflected in those statistics. And it all sounds all twisted and confusing to me. But for people who are interested in that, that is actually a very important question to answer. Likewise, if we don't find anything, what we can also do is actually put that question to the wider researcher community and actually ask if there's anyone who's actually willing to sit down and have a chat with you. And then you can just see where that leads, because it might be they might think it's not that important because somebody hasn't raised it as a need. But it just might be you don't know where to raise that as a need, or you don't know the right person to get in front of to be able to do that.
Yes.
So I would say the best thing to do is to just send me an email with just literally 2-3 lines. It doesn't need to be wordy. And then what I'll do is I will go on the hunt and look for people with an interest in that area. And then I can facilitate the conversation, so you can have chats with them and then just find out the work that's going on. And I think from that, then you can actually get signed up as a contributor to groups that do that. Chances are they sit in universities, not the actual hospitals. So it's just finding the right one for you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. And Rashmi has just added, if I come to you, Manoj, and Rashmi has also added other implants, gastric bands, breast implants, you know, all done with very little or limited PPI consideration. So yep, exactly, Rashmi. We're there to try and stop that. So next time you see a news headline saying the NHS doesn't want to take something, there's a very good reason for that. They're not just being stingy. Yes, Manoj.
For Kate's benefit, the Research for Patient Benefit Funding Panel, unfortunately, I'm not sure whether they exist in Wales, but in England, we have 7 regions and 7 panels. So that would be an appropriate panel for Kate to join as a public contributor as and when a vacancy arises in any of the 7 regions within England. And also the NIHR fellowships. whereby somebody who's, say, recently completed a PhD, they then apply for a fellowship to study a particular narrow area of interest for their personal development, career development. Might be 18 months, it might be another 3 years. And that fellowship might look at these intangibles, these more subjective issues that affects patients and the carers, people that use the NHS. So NIHR fellowships, otherwise the Research for Patient Benefit Funding Panel, Kate.
Thank you, Manoj, for that. Yes, I'll send you that information. I'll send you links as well, Kate.
Yes.
To those, yeah.
Well, thank you both. Right.
Cheryl?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sort of quite similar actually. There's a lot of things that I'm particularly interested in, but I've not managed to find information about. Do you have somewhere where we can like have a look on the, I have had a quick scroll on the website, but you have to actually look specifically about the bits that we're interested in or that we could sort of investigate ourselves? Is there anywhere specific where we can do that?
I mean, if you tell me, send me a note with what you want to get, because I can appreciate the website is not that easy to to navigate, and most NHR websites aren't. And it's probably something that we'll look at in the next round of the mix, is actually having patient and public members actually helping with the design and the topics and stuff of the website. But if you let me know, sort of give me an example of what you want to find, I should be able to send you an appropriate link, because I can't say right now, well, you need to go into this section and this is what you'll find. So yeah, definitely ping me an email, or the generic surgical make email, and I'll be able to send you more specific information for now. But it's a good point. We are working on our comms. Okay, so unless there's anything else, any other contributions, then I can draw this to a close. So the meeting's being recorded. It will go onto our YouTube channel, but you're going to get all the links of things that I've promised in this session and that others have suggested as well. So you'll get those links in a follow-up email. Hopefully by Wednesday you should get it, because I just need to wait for the video to download and format before I can do anything else. Yeah, if you've got any other additional questions, then please feel free to ask me. If you want to be in touch, connected to any one of our PPI members, Julie, Rashmi, or Manoj, then let me know, and then I will make the introduction. And then obviously you can ask them more questions related to PPI and other things that you probably felt you didn't want to ask in this particular session. That's perfectly fine, and they've offered up their help as well. And likewise, if you want to find out more, you can register. The next session is in September now, because we all decided August was a break. We needed a break, but we'll be back in September, and we'll carry on up until February or March next year. And then we'll sort of review that and see how we carry that on and what changes we need to make to the format as well. But apart from that, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Keep cool, keep hydrated. Enjoy the holiday, and see you in September.
Yes.
Thanks, V.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.